Long before flowering plants existed, before trees had proper roots, before most of what we'd recognize as a modern plant had evolved at all, a strange, leafless, rootless green stem was already growing on Earth. A living relic so architecturally simple that botanists sometimes call it a living fossil. Psilotum complanatum, a rare, flattened whisk fern relative found clinging to tree bark in a handful of scattered tropical and subtropical locations, is one of the last surviving examples of this ancient plant lineage. It has almost no roots, no true leaves, and a body plan that hasn't fundamentally changed in hundreds of millions of years. But what if a plant built to survive by minimalism and resilience had something to say about one of the few human organs capable of an ancient kind of resilience of its own, the liver's remarkable capacity to regenerate? This is the story of an ancient fern relative and a thought experiment about liver regeneration, fatty liver disease, and the limits of what the body can repair on its own. Psilotum belongs to the Psilotaceae, a small family of vascular plants often described as among the most primitive living plant lineages still in existence today. Unlike ferns, mosses, or flowering plants, Psilotum species lack true roots and true leaves entirely. The visible green structure is essentially a photosynthetic stem, absorbing what it needs directly through its surface and through a symbiotic underground relationship with fungi, a strategy scientists believe closely resembles how the very earliest land plants survived hundreds of millions of years ago, before roots had evolved at all. Psilotum complanatum specifically is a flattened, pendulous species typically found growing epiphytically on tree bark in humid, high-elevation tropical and subtropical forest, including documented populations in Hawaii, where it is considered rare and has been the subject of real conservation concern due to habitat loss and the spread of invasive species that outcompete native epiphytes. This part of the story is well documented. A genuinely ancient, structurally minimalist plant lineage with at least one rare, geographically limited species under real ecological pressure today. Botanists studying Psilotaceae have long been fascinated by how little this genus resembles anything else in the modern plant kingdom. Its dichotomous branching pattern, its lack of any recognizable leaf structure, and its reliance on a mycorrhizal fungal partnership rather than roots make it a genuine outlier even among other so-called primitive plants like ferns and mosses. Some researchers consider it one of the closest living approximations available today of what the very earliest land plants may have looked like, making it a genuinely valuable subject for evolutionary botany, independent of anything to do with medicine. Here's what's genuinely true, separate from anything imagined in this video, and it's worth explaining clearly because it's the whole reason this story is even worth telling. The human liver is one of the only internal organs capable of substantial self-regeneration. A liver that loses up to roughly half its mass, whether through surgery or injury, can regrow to nearly its original size within weeks in a healthy person, through a well-documented biological process involving liver cell division and complex growth factor signaling. This is real, established medical science, foundational to how living donor liver transplants are even possible. The problem is that this regenerative capacity has real limits. In conditions like fatty liver disease and especially cirrhosis, ongoing inflammation and scarring, a process called fibrosis, gradually replaces healthy, regenerating liver tissue with permanent scar tissue that cannot regenerate the way healthy tissue can. Once cirrhosis reaches an advanced stage, this scarring is generally considered irreversible with current medicine, which is exactly why researchers are so interested in understanding what triggers and sustains healthy liver regeneration, because the more precisely that process is understood, the more realistic it becomes to someday support it or slow the fibrosis that undermines it through improved therapies. This context matters because it means the core premise of tonight's story sits on top of real, well-established liver biology. What this video adds from here is speculative, connecting that real biology to an unstudied ancient fern relative in a story that hasn't actually happened. This is explicitly a thought experiment. Nothing in this chapter describes an actual study, compound, or discovery that currently exists. Imagine, for the sake of the story, that researchers studying Psilotum's unusual biochemistry, shaped by hundreds of millions of years of surviving without roots, relying instead on a close relationship with symbiotic fungi to acquire nutrients, identified a distinctive class of alkaloid compounds already known to exist in Psilotaceae species, and found that in laboratory cell studies using cultured liver cells, one of these compounds appeared to reduce markers of cellular stress and modestly support cell survival under conditions mimicking early-stage fatty liver damage. And imagine that finding generated genuine interest among hepatology researchers, not because it suggested a cure for cirrhosis, but because it pointed toward a mechanism worth years of further laboratory and animal study, sitting alongside the antifibrotic drug candidates and metabolic therapies already being pursued through legitimate, ongoing liver disease research programs. That is as far as the imagined story goes. In this thought experiment, exactly as in real hepatology research, an early cell culture signal would be many years and multiple research phases away from anything resembling a human treatment, and would not, at any point along that path, mean a real person with fatty liver disease or cirrhosis should delay diagnosis, change their treatment plan, or continue behaviors known to worsen liver damage. It's worth explaining plainly why this topic deserves particular care. Fatty liver disease and cirrhosis are often described by hepatologists as silent conditions, frequently causing no noticeable symptoms until the disease has already progressed significantly, sometimes to an advanced or life-threatening stage involving complications like fluid buildup, internal bleeding from enlarged veins, or confusion caused by toxin buildup. The damaged liver can no longer filter effectively. Regular screening, blood work, and imaging, guided by a doctor, are the real, currently available tools for catching liver disease early, when lifestyle changes and medical treatment are most likely to be effective at slowing or even partially reversing damage, particularly in earlier fatty liver stages before significant scarring has occurred. That means even a genuine future breakthrough in supporting liver regeneration, the kind real hepatology researchers are actively investigating today through legitimate antifibrotic and metabolic therapy programs, would take years of clinical trials before reaching patients. A plant discovery, real or imagined, would be no exception to that timeline, and nothing in this video should be read as a reason to delay screening, ignore a doctor's guidance on alcohol use or weight management, or skip recommended monitoring for an existing liver condition. Fatty liver disease, in particular, has become dramatically more common in recent decades, closely tied to rising rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome worldwide. Unlike many liver conditions of the past, which were most strongly associated with heavy alcohol use, this newer wave of fatty liver disease often develops in people who drink little or no alcohol at all, which is part of why routine screening matters so much. Many people affected have no obvious risk factor that would prompt them to ask a doctor about it on their own. If you have been told you have fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, or any other liver condition, or you're concerned you might, please don't wait for a future breakthrough, plant-based or otherwise, before seeking care. This entire episode is built around real, well-established liver biology, wrapped around a speculative what-if story about an ancient fern relative that hasn't actually been studied this way. Real progress in liver disease treatment is being pursued seriously through antifibrotic drug development, metabolic and weight management therapies, and, for advanced cases, liver transplantation. And when something real does emerge, it will reach patients through a hepatologist and years of clinical trials, not through a video about a rootless, leafless plant clinging to tree bark. This isn't a disclaimer added out of caution alone. It's the most important sentence in this script. Liver disease is manageable and, in earlier stages, sometimes even partially reversible with real medical guidance today. And no plant, ancient or newly studied, is a substitute for that care. Set the speculation aside, and there's still something genuinely worth sitting with. Psilotum's survival strategy, stripping away nearly everything considered essential to a normal plant and surviving anyway through an ancient partnership with fungi, is a remarkable, real example of evolutionary minimalism succeeding against enormous odds across hundreds of millions of years. It has outlasted the rise and fall of entire plant lineages that seemed, at the time, far better equipped for survival. There's a loose but genuine parallel worth sitting with here, entirely separate from any medical claim. The liver's own regenerative ability is, in its own way, a similarly ancient and remarkable biological trait, one evolution clearly considered worth preserving across an enormous span of animal history. Understanding both, an ancient plant that refuses to disappear and an organ built to repair itself, is worthwhile science, regardless of whether the two turn out to have anything real to say to each other. Psilotum complanatum may never turn out to hold anything close to what this story imagines about liver disease, but its real ancient talent for surviving without almost everything a plant is supposed to need is worth understanding on its own merit. And for anyone facing liver disease today, the most important step isn't waiting on an unstudied fern relative. It's getting screened, staying in touch with a doctor, and using the real tools already available right now. Somewhere between a rootless survivor clinging to bark in a Hawaiian cloud forest and a hepatology research lab, there may genuinely be something worth discovering. But until that discovery is real, tested, and approved, the liver's best ally remains the same one it's always had: early detection and consistent medical care.